Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Federation training facility hung in orbit around a purple gas giant like a monument to controlled violence. Sprawling and geometric, the station had been designed by the Krill, a species that had perfected warfare before humans discovered fire. And it showed. Every angle was sharp. Every surface gleamed with the kind of sterile precision that suggested bloodstains wouldn't dare linger. This was where the Federation sent its most promising young predators to become even more lethal. This was where futures were forged in pain, discipline, and the unspoken understanding that weakness got you killed. The station's corridors were wide enough to accommodate species that stood 3 meters tall and nearly as broad. Gravity shifted between sections to match the homeworld conditions of different races. Temperature zones ranged from sub-zero to scorching. The architects had thought of everything, really. Everything except the possibility that one day they'd have to accommodate humans. Nora's boots made soft sounds against the metallic floor as she walked through the main corridor, her single duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She was average height for a human woman, which made her comically small by Federation standards. No scales, no fur, no chitinous plates or retractable claws. Just skin, plain fatigues, and the kind of quiet composure that either came from immense confidence or complete ignorance of danger. The other instructors noticed her immediately. A cluster of them stood near the administrative hub, their conversation dying the moment she passed. Towering figures with natural weapons that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. They watched her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. "That's the replacement," one of them muttered in Galactic standard, clearly assuming the human wouldn't understand the linguistic nuances of disdain. She understood just fine. Didn't react, though. Just kept walking. The facility commander's office sat at the station's central axis, where the rotation created something close to Earth-standard gravity. Convenient. Volneth occupied the space behind his desk like a monument to his species' evolutionary success. Towering, multi-limbed, with compound eyes that could track movement in practically every direction simultaneously. His chitinous exterior gleamed under the cold lighting, black shot through with veins of deep green. He didn't stand when Nora entered. Didn't offer the traditional Federation greeting, either. Just regarded her with the kind of assessment usually reserved for examining a piece of malfunctioning equipment. "Instructor Nora," he said, mandibles clicking around the syllables. "Your credentials have been reviewed." The pause before that last word spoke volumes. "Commander Volneth," she replied evenly. "You're replacing War Master Krillvax. 2 centuries of service. Undefeated combat record. Trained 6 generations of elite warriors." He tilted his head in that distinctly insectoid way that suggested he was viewing her from multiple angles simultaneously. "The administration was quite surprised by your assignment." Translation: "They think you're a joke." "I can imagine," Nora said. "The students in your cohort are challenging. Apex predator species, most of them. Already capable of lethal force. They've been training under traditional Federation doctrine for 8 months. I've read their files." "Have you?" It wasn't a question. Volneth's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or irritation, hard to tell with his species. "Then you understand that these juveniles possess capabilities that exceed human physical parameters in virtually every measurable category." "Virtually," Nora agreed, smiling slightly. The commander's compound eyes seemed to refract the light differently for a moment. The previous instructor maintained discipline through demonstrated superiority. Physical dominance. The students respect strength. I'm sure they do. You are aware that Federation protocol requires instructors to establish authority through traditional means during the first training session. Ah, there it was. He was warning her, in his bureaucratic way, that the students would challenge her, test her, possibly try to hurt her. And Federation rules not only allowed it, they encouraged it. Prove you're the alpha or get eaten. Metaphorically, usually. I appreciate the briefing, Commander, Nora said. Volneth studied her for a long moment. Your quarters are in Section 9. Training begins at 600 station time. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it. She turned to leave, and his voice stopped her at the threshold. Instructor Nora, War Master Krillvax requested transfer to a less demanding posting. He cited exhaustion. After 2 centuries, he was tired. The commander's tone shifted into something that might have been genuine curiosity. Why would a human volunteer for this assignment? Nora glanced back over her shoulder. Maybe I like a challenge. Or maybe, Volneth said quietly. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. She smiled again, warmer this time, but with an edge that suggested she knew exactly what she'd signed up for. Guess we'll find out. The training arena occupied an entire deck of the facility, a massive space sectioned into environmental zones that could simulate conditions from dozens of Federation worlds. Zero-gravity chambers, extreme heat pits, freezing wastelands, obstacle courses designed by sadists with doctorates in creative suffering. The whole thing smelled like sweat and recycled air, and the particular kind of tension that came from pushing bodies to their absolute limits. Nora arrived 15 minutes early. The cubs were already there, because of course they were. Young predators, their instructors had learned, tended to show up early to everything, scanning for threats, establishing territory. All that. Good evolutionary programming. There were 23 of them in total, ranging from species she recognized to a few she'd only read about in the briefing materials. They moved through their warm-up drills with the kind of casual lethality that suggested they'd been born dangerous and had spent every day since getting better at it. The smallest was a feline-type species, all sleek muscle and retractable claws, with fur that shifted colors based on mood, currently showing aggressive reds and oranges. Kicks, according to the file. Male, 12 in human-equivalent years, but already capable of taking down prey twice his size. The largest was Ven, a reptilian whose scales looked like they could deflect small arms fire. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with overwhelming physical force. The file said he was a prodigy, top of his cohort in every combat metric. They noticed her immediately, of course. The drills didn't stop. They were too well trained for that, but attention shifted. Eyes tracked her movement. Postures changed subtly. The atmosphere in the room tightened, like a wire about to snap. Right on schedule, Volneth's voice echoed through the arena's communication system. Students, your new combat instructor has arrived. Instructor Nora, Federation Combat Division. You will extend her the same respect you showed War Master Krillvax. The last part was delivered with just enough sarcasm to let everyone know what the commander really thought about that possibility. 23 pairs of eyes locked onto her, some curious, some calculating, a few openly hostile. This was the moment, Nora knew. The moment where she was supposed to demonstrate dominance, where she'd select the most aggressive student and put them down hard enough to establish the pecking order. Traditional Federation doctrine. Simple, effective. Instead, she walked to the center of the training mat and sat down, cross-legged, eye level with the smallest students, hands relaxed in her lap. The confused silence that followed was absolutely delicious. Ven broke it first, his voice a low rumble that carried across the arena. "What are you doing?" "Sitting," Nora replied pleasantly. "Seemed like a good time for introductions. I'm Nora. I already know your names from your files, but I'd rather hear how you pronounce them. Who wants to go first?" Nobody moved. They were staring at her like she'd just violated some fundamental law of physics. "Is this a human strategy?" Tak asked, his crystalline carapace catching the light as he tilted his head. "Lure opponents into false security before striking?" "Nope, just sitting, waiting for introductions." She looked around the circle of increasingly baffled young predators. "Come on, don't be shy. You've been training together for 8 months. You're comfortable with each other. I'm the new variable. Let's get acquainted." Kix took a cautious step forward. Then another. His fur shifted from aggressive red to confused purple-blue. "You're not going to establish dominance?" "Already established," Nora said with a slight shrug. "I'm the instructor. You're the students. Dominance isn't the question. The question is whether we're going to waste time posturing or get to the interesting stuff." "The interesting stuff," Ven repeated slowly, like he was testing the words for hidden traps. "Combat training, strategy, tactics, making you even more terrifying than you already are." She grinned. "Unless you'd rather spend the session trying to figure out if you can take me in a fight. We can do that too, if you really want. But fair warning, I'm a terrible loser, and even worse winner, so it'll get awkward." Ulma, the amphibious student whose bioluminescent markings were flickering in rapid patterns, made a sound like water burbling over rocks. Laughter, Nora thought, or the species equivalent. "You're strange," Ulma said, "guilty as charged." And just like that, the tension cracked. Not shattered. These were still apex predators who'd been raised on competition and conflict, but definitely cracked. Kix moved closer, settling into a crouch a few meters away. Wix, the avian student, tilted her head at an angle that would have been anatomically impossible for a human, and made a curious trilling sound. War Master Krillvax would have selected the strongest student and engaged in ritual combat by now, Tak observed. "War Master Krillvax isn't here anymore," Nora replied. "I am. Different instructor, different methods. You okay with that? Or should I request a transfer and they can find you someone more traditional?" "No!" The response came from multiple students simultaneously, which was interesting. Ven stepped forward, his massive frame blocking out some of the overhead lighting. "I want to understand your strategy. You're small, no natural weapons. Human physiology is inferior to most Federation species in measurable categories, yet you show no fear." "Should I be afraid?" Nora asked, genuinely curious. "I could kill you in seconds." "Probably," she agreed cheerfully. "But you won't." "Why not?" "Because you're smarter than that. You're not here to kill instructors. You're here to learn how to be better warriors. And despite what traditional doctrine might suggest, threatening your teacher is a terrible learning strategy." Ven's eyes narrowed. "You're unlike any Federation instructor I've encountered." "I'm human. We tend to do things our own way." She stood up in one fluid motion, brushing off her fatigues. "Speaking of which, who wants to show me what you've been working on? I read the reports, but I'd rather see for myself what you can do." They looked at each other, that pack communication happening in glances and subtle body language. Kix spoke up, his voice uncertain but curious. What kind of demonstration? Whatever you think showcases your best skills. Solo or team exercises. Your choice. I'm just here to watch and learn what I'm working with. You want to learn from us? Wicks sounded genuinely confused. Best teachers are always learning, Nora said. Show me what you've got. What followed was 2 hours of the most impressive display of juvenile lethality Nora had ever witnessed. They ran through combat drills that would have hospitalized human soldiers, coordination exercises in zero gravity that required split-second timing and absolute trust, environmental adaptation sequences that pushed their abilities to the limit. And Nora watched all of it, asking questions, offering observations, remembering every name and matching them to fighting styles and personalities. By the time the session ended, half the class was clustered around her, chattering in multiple languages, seeking approval, showing off techniques they'd developed independently. In the monitoring room above the arena, Vulneth watched the scene with his compound eyes reflecting the displays in fragmented patterns. Impossible, muttered one of the other instructors beside him. Indeed, Vulneth agreed. But it was happening anyway. The human had walked into training, and the cubs who'd been forged into weapons by 2 centuries' worth of the Federation's finest warrior, had leapt from their pack hierarchy and run straight to her. And not one of them looked like they planned on leaving. The transformation didn't happen overnight, because Nora wasn't an idiot and neither were her students, but it happened fast enough to make the other instructors deeply uncomfortable. By the 3rd day, the cubs were arriving at training 30 minutes early just to talk to her. By the 5th day, they were staying an extra hour after the official session ended, running through additional drills they'd designed themselves and wanted her feedback on. By the end of the first week, the monitoring staff had stopped pretending they weren't watching her sessions with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or particularly bizarre medical conditions. The training arena had become something completely different under Nora's supervision. Where War Master Krillvax had run his students through repetitive conditioning drills focused on individual dominance, Nora introduced concepts that made the traditional instructors want to file formal complaints on principle. All right, she called out on the 8th day, standing in the center of the arena with 23 attentive young predators arranged in a loose semicircle around her. Pop quiz. Then, you're tracking prey through a dense forest environment. You have the advantage in strength, speed, and natural weapons. The prey has none of these advantages. How do you ensure a successful hunt? Ven's answer came immediately, confident. Identify the optimal ambush point. Strike fast. Overwhelm before they can escape. Textbook answer. Now, same scenario, but your prey is human. Same approach? The reptilian paused, scales shifting. Colors slightly as he processed the question. Humans are physically inferior. The strategy would remain effective. Wrong, Nora said cheerfully. You're dead. Confused murmuring rippled through the class. I didn't even describe how the human killed me, Ven protested. Didn't have to. You made 3 fatal assumptions. First, you assumed physical inferiority equals tactical disadvantage. Second, you assumed your prey would follow predictable escape patterns. Third, you assumed a quick kill was possible. Nora started pacing, her voice taking on that storytelling quality that always seemed to grab their attention. Humans don't have claws or fangs or armored hides. What we have is pattern recognition, tool use, and spite. Lots of spite. That human you're hunting, they noticed you tracking them 2 kilometers back. They've been leading you to prepared ground. And when you spring your ambush, you're going to discover that humans are really, really good at turning environmental features into weapons. Kix's fur had shifted to intrigued yellow-green. You're saying humans would set traps. I'm saying humans invented complex trap setting. We've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of rotations. We're not stronger or faster, so we got creative. And creative beats strong almost every time when the creative one sees you coming. Tak's crystalline structure chimed softly as he shifted position. This contradicts Federation combat doctrine. Strength and speed determine victory. Federation combat doctrine was written by species that had strength and speed, Nora pointed out. Of course they think those attributes determine victory. Confirmation bias. But here's the thing. I want you to be better than doctrine. I want you to be warriors who can adapt to any opponent, any situation, any advantage or disadvantage. And that means learning to think like prey sometimes. The silence that followed was profound. In Federation culture, comparing warriors to prey was somewhere between insult and heresy. Ulma's bioluminescent markings pulsed in rapid sequences. You want us to think like victims? I want you to think like survivors, Nora corrected. There's a difference. Prey that survives long enough becomes something else. Becomes dangerous in ways predators don't expect. Humans spent millions of rotations as prey before we figured out how to flip the script. I'm going to teach you those lessons. Not so you become prey, so you become predators smart enough to handle prey that fights back. Wix made a trilling sound that the translator rendered as thoughtful consideration. This is why you study our techniques, but also ask about our fears. Exactly. Your strengths are obvious. I can see those in 30 seconds. Your weaknesses, your concerns, the things that make you hesitate. Those are harder to spot, but twice as important to address. Any of you can kill effectively. That's genetic. I'm here to teach you to survive effectively. Big difference. Ven's tail lashed once, a sign of agitation. I wish to test your theory. Which theory? I've thrown out like 6 in the last 10 minutes. That adaptability defeats strength. I challenge you to demonstrate. And there it was. The moment Nora had been waiting for since day 1. She'd known it would come. Young predators needed to test boundaries, needed to understand hierarchy through direct experience. Traditional instructors would have declined or turned it into a formal dominance ritual. Nora just grinned like someone had offered her free dessert. You want to spar? Yes. Rules? Ven seemed surprised by the question. Standard combat parameters. First to yield or achieve submission hold. No permanent damage? Of course not. This is training. Cool. Let's do it. Nora walked to the center of the sparring ring, a designated area with reinforced flooring designed to handle combat between species that could shatter concrete. Fair warning, I'm going to look ridiculous, and you're going to feel confused. That's normal. The other cubs formed a circle around the sparring area, their attention laser-focused. In the monitoring room above, every instructor on break suddenly found reasons to check the displays. Ven entered the ring with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a sparring match. He was easily twice Nora's mass, covered in scales that could deflect bladed weapons, with claws that could rend metal, and a tail strong enough to shatter bone. His combat record was flawless. His physical advantages were overwhelming. Nora stood across from him looking like someone who'd wandered into the wrong room by accident. Begin when ready, she said. Ven moved like liquid violence. Fast, faster than something his size had any right to be. His opening strike was a textbook example of his species' combat style. Closing distance instantly, using reach and power to overwhelm before the opponent could establish defense. Nora wasn't there. She'd shifted her weight and angle just enough that Ven's claws passed through empty air where her torso had been a fraction of a second earlier. His momentum carried him forward, and she was already moving, one hand barely touching his extended arm, not pushing, not pulling, just redirecting. Ven stumbled. Actually stumbled. His tail whipped around for balance, and Nora ducked under it like she'd known exactly where it would be. He spun, recalibrating. Tried a different approach. Feint high, strike low. Use the tail as a third attack vector to limit escape routes. Nora swayed between the strikes like she was dancing, her movements minimal, efficient. Each of Ven's attacks missed by smaller margins than the last, and the pattern was becoming clear to anyone watching. She wasn't faster than him. She was just always in the wrong place for his strikes to connect. "You're holding back," Nora observed, her breathing barely elevated. Ven snarled in frustration and stopped holding back. What followed was a display of reptilian combat prowess that would have earned approving nods from War Master Krillvax himself. Ven used every advantage his species possessed: strength, speed, natural weapons, environmental awareness. His strikes could have pulverized a human skull. His grappling attempts involved enough force to crack reinforced armor. None of it connected. Nora flowed around his attacks like water, occasionally using his own momentum against him, turning his strength into a liability. When he overextended on a particularly vicious claw strike, she stepped inside his guard, got under his center of gravity, and used basic physics to send him tumbling across the mat. He rolled to his feet immediately, but his eyes had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something like comprehension mixed with disbelief. "How?" he demanded. "You're thinking like a predator," Nora said, not even winded. "Overwhelming force, decisive strikes, dominance through power. It's in your DNA. Your species wouldn't have survived without those instincts. But those same instincts make you predictable. You commit fully to each attack because that's what works against prey that panics. And you don't panic. I'm human. We panic all the time. We just got really good at functioning while panicking." She gestured for him to continue. "Again. But this time, try thinking about what I'm going to do instead of what you want to do." The second round lasted longer because Ven started adapting. He feinted more, committed less, watched for her patterns. But Nora adapted faster, changing her response timing, introducing irregular rhythms that disrupted his predictions. It ended with Ven on the mat again, Nora's hand barely touching the pressure point on his neck that would signal a submission hold in formal combat, but not actually applying force. "Yield?" she asked. "Yield," he confirmed, sounding more fascinated than frustrated. Nora stepped back and offered her hand. Ven stared at it for a moment, this human gesture of assistance, of equality despite clear victory, then took it. She helped him to his feet, and something fundamental shifted in the arena's atmosphere. That, Kix breathed, his fur blazing brilliant gold, was incredible. "That was frustrating," Ven corrected, but he was grinning, the reptilian equivalent anyway. "I couldn't touch her." "Because you were trying to," Nora said. "You were fighting your fight. I was fighting your fight too, just from the other side. The trick isn't being stronger or faster. It's understanding the fight better than your opponent does." Cora, who'd been silent throughout the demonstration, spoke up in her rumbling voice. "War Master Krillvax taught us that superior warriors impose their will on combat. You're teaching the opposite." "I'm teaching that superior is situational. Ven is absolutely a superior warrior in about 90% of combat scenarios. Put him in a straight fight against most opponents. He wins. But that other 10%, the weird situations, the unexpected variables, the opponents who don't follow standard patterns, that's where battles are actually decided. I'm teaching you to handle the 10%, so the 90% takes care of itself. Tax Carapace chimed with excitement. You're teaching flexibility. I'm teaching survival through adaptation, which, coincidentally, is humanity's entire evolutionary strategy, summarized in 4 words. Wix's head tilted. Is that why humans are Federation members despite lacking natural weapons? We made our own weapons. Then we made weapons for our weapons. Then we made strategies that turned everything into weapons. Adaptability is our natural weapon. Spite is our armor. Stubbornness is our camouflage. Nora looked around at 23 young faces, each belonging to a species that could tear her apart without breaking a sweat. And I'm going to teach you to fight like humans, think like humans, and survive like humans. Not because human methods are better than your species' methods, but because having more tools makes you more dangerous. This will make us better warriors, Ulma said, her bioluminescence pulsing steady blue. This will make you survivors who happen to be warriors. There's a difference. Warriors die in glorious combat all the time. Survivors go home. In the monitoring room, Volneth watched the human instructor surrounded by cubs who hung on her every word. The senior instructors around him were less enthusiastic. "This is unacceptable," one of them growled. "She's undermining fundamental doctrine." "She's improving their performance metrics," Volneth noted, gesturing to the data displays. Reaction times up 12%. Strategic assessment scores increased 15%. Cooperative exercise success rate has nearly doubled. By teaching them to think like prey. By teaching them to think, the commander corrected quietly. There's a difference. But he understood their concern. The human wasn't just teaching combat techniques. She was teaching philosophy, strategy, adaptability. She was taking young predators raised on strength and dominance and showing them that intelligence and flexibility could defeat superior force. She was, in essence, teaching them to fight like humans. And whether that was brilliant or dangerous remained to be seen. The rebellion started during the 3rd week. Not from the students. They were thriving under Nora's instruction, their performance metrics climbing steadily while their attitudes shifted from competitive aggression to something that looked disturbingly like teamwork. No, the rebellion came from the instructors who'd been teaching Federation doctrine for decades and didn't appreciate some human upstart making them look outdated. Quen was the one who made it official. He was massive even by Federation standards. A quadrupedal species with an armored hide that had deflected plasma fire during actual combat, not just simulations. Battle scars covered his body like a roadmap of violence successfully survived. He'd been teaching at the facility for 30 rotations and had never questioned whether his methods were correct because his methods produced results. Deadly, efficient, traditional results. He found Nora in the observation deck during off hours. She was standing by the viewport, watching the purple gas giant's storms swirl in patterns that probably meant something to meteorologists. Her reflection in the reinforced glass looked small and tired. Instructor Nora. His voice was a low rumble that made the deck plating vibrate slightly. She turned, unsurprised. Quen. What can I do for you? You can explain why you're corrupting galactic military doctrine with human weakness? No preamble? No diplomatic phrasing, just straight to the accusation. Nora had to respect the directness, even if the content was insulting. That's a hefty claim, she said mildly. Want to be more specific? You teach cooperation over dominance, empathy over aggression. You encourage your students to consider opponents' perspectives, to understand rather than simply defeat. His eyes narrowed. You're making them soft. Am I? Nora leaned against the viewport. Their combat scores have increased. Their strategic assessment capabilities have improved. Their injury rate during training has dropped to nearly 0, while the difficulty of exercises has increased. Which part of that sounds soft to you? The part where they laugh during combat drills? The part where they help each other instead of competing? The part where they question traditional approaches instead of executing them? Quen moved closer, his bulk making the observation deck feel suddenly smaller. War is not a cooperative exercise. Warriors must be forged through adversity, hardship, pain. Your methods produce students who rely on teammates instead of themselves. My methods produce students who enhance individual capabilities through teamwork while maintaining personal excellence. There's a difference. Is there? Quen's tone carried the weight of decades teaching young warriors. When they face real combat, when their teammates are dead, and they stand alone against overwhelming odds, your philosophy of cooperation will get them killed. Nora was quiet for a moment, her expression shifting to something harder. You want to test that theory? I do. Fine. Propose a scenario. Quen's satisfaction was evident. Tactical simulation. Your students against my advanced class. My students are older, larger, more experienced. They've been training under traditional doctrine for 2 full rotations. Your cubs have been under your instruction for 3 weeks. He paused. Standard combat parameters. First team to achieve objective or eliminate opposition wins. Stakes? If my team wins, you modify your teaching approach to align with Federation standards. And when my students win? If, Quen corrected. If your students win, I will personally apologize to you in front of the entire instructional staff and acknowledge that human methods have merit. Nora smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Deal. When do you want to schedule this humiliation? Tomorrow. 1400 hours. Main simulation arena. Quen turned to leave, then paused. You seem confident. I am confident. Why? Your students are children. Mine are nearly adults. The physical disparity alone should concern you. Physical disparity, Nora said quietly, is only relevant if both sides are fighting the same kind of battle. We're not. The next afternoon, the main simulation arena filled with instructors who'd suddenly discovered they had free time during 1400 hours. Word had spread. The humans' teaching methods would finally be tested against proper Federation doctrine. Most of the spectators were there to watch her fail. The simulation itself was straightforward. Urban combat environment, objective-based scenario. One team had to secure and hold a central position. The other team had to prevent them or retake it. Standard military exercise, run thousands of times with predictable outcomes based on size, strength, and experience. Quen's advanced students entered the arena first. 8 of them, all nearly adult, all trained in traditional Federation combat doctrine. They moved with the precision of experienced warriors, immediately establishing defensive positions and patrol routes. Nora's cubs came in looking tiny by comparison. 23 of them. Yes, but juveniles, smaller, less experienced in formal combat. The betting odds among the watching instructors were heavily in Quen's favor. The simulation started. Quen's students executed textbook Federation tactics. Aggressive patrol patterns, overwhelming force at contact points, individual excellence driving toward decisive engagement. They were disciplined, efficient, deadly. They lasted 8 minutes, What Nora's cubs did wasn't in any Federation tactical manual. They didn't engage in direct combat. They made the environment itself hostile. They used the urban terrain like a living weapon, turning corners into ambush points and sight lines into traps. They communicated constantly, coordinating movements that kept Quen's larger students off balance and reactive instead of proactive. Ven didn't try to overpower opponents. He herded them into positions where Ulma's bioluminescent flashes could disorient them. Hicks used his small size to access routes the larger students couldn't follow, feeding intelligence to teammates who adjusted tactics in real time. Wicks provided aerial reconnaissance that let the team anticipate enemy movements before they happened. They didn't fight like warriors. They fought like a distributed intelligence network that happened to have claws and fangs. When the simulation ended with Quen's students pinned in their own defensive position, unable to move without exposing themselves to coordinated strikes from multiple angles, the silence in the observation room was absolute. Nora stood beside Quen, watching the replay on the tactical displays. "Your students fought well," she said. "Textbook execution. Against a traditional opponent, they would have won decisively. But not against yours. Not against mine, because mine weren't trying to win individual engagements. They were trying to win the scenario. Different objective, different approach, different outcome." Quen studied the displays, his expression unreadable. They sacrificed individual glory for collective success. They recognized that collective success serves individual survival better than personal glory serves collective goals. It's not weakness, it's strategic prioritization. This is not how Federation warriors are trained. Federation warriors, Nora said quietly, have been trained by species that evolved as apex predators, dominant, powerful, individually lethal. That doctrine works brilliantly for those species, but it's not the only way to win. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and cooperative survivors. Our doctrine reflects that. I'm not replacing your methods. I'm adding options. The observation room had erupted in arguments. Some instructors were outraged. Others looked thoughtful. A few were already analyzing the tactical data, reconsidering assumptions they'd held for decades. Quen was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned to face the assembled instructors. "I was wrong," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet. "Human methods have merit. Instructor Nora's approach produces effective warriors through means I did not anticipate or understand. I apologize for my presumption." Nora inclined her head respectfully. "Apology accepted. Your students are excellent, Quen. The fact that mine won doesn't diminish their capabilities." "No," he agreed, "but it expands my understanding of what capabilities can be." In the arena below, Nora's cubs were celebrating, not with dominance displays or individual posturing, but with the kind of collective joy that came from shared victory. They clustered together, laughing, reliving moments from the simulation, congratulating each other. Watching them, Vulnith felt something shift in his understanding. The human hadn't just taught combat techniques. She'd taught connection, community. The idea that strength multiplied through cooperation could exceed strength expressed through dominance. It was revolutionary. It was dangerous. It was absolutely fascinating. And somewhere in the back of his compound mind, a question formed. What else could humans teach the galaxy about survival? The alarm came at 0300 station time, screaming through every corridor with the kind of urgency that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Nora was already awake. Insomnia was a familiar companion these days when the emergency lighting flooded her quarters in red. She was dressed and moving before the automated announcement finished, explaining the crisis. Catastrophic systems failure, life support compromised in Wing 12, automated lockdowns engaged, personnel trapped. Wing 12, the youth dormitories, cubs who weren't old enough for combat training yet, the facility's youngest residents. Nora hit the corridor at a run, following the flow of instructors converging on the crisis point. Volineth was already coordinating from the central hub, his multiple limbs working across various control interfaces simultaneously. "Status," Nora demanded, arriving slightly out of breath. "Coolant leak in Wing 12 caused cascading failures. Life support is offline. Doors sealed automatically to contain the breach." The commander's voice was steady, but his mandibles were clicking rapidly. A stress indicator. 16 juveniles trapped. External temperature in that section dropping rapidly. They have maybe 20 minutes before hypothermia becomes fatal. "What's the access situation?" "The only route goes through Maintenance Corridor 9 Alpha. It's exposed to exterior vacuum after the hull breach. Radiation levels are critical. No species on this facility can survive that crossing without full environmental suits." "Where are the suits?" Volineth's compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting in fractured patterns. "In Wing 12, on the other side of the breach." Of course they were, because the universe had a terrible sense of humor. Other instructors were already arguing about alternatives, trying to override the lockdown remotely. Systems were too damaged. Cutting through the bulkheads would take hours they didn't have. Emergency teleport, not rated for life forms, only equipment. Nora was already moving toward Maintenance Corridor 9 Alpha. "Instructor Nora, stop." Volineth's voice carried authority and something else. Concern. "That route is lethal. Hard vacuum and radiation exposure will kill any biological entity within minutes." "Good thing I'm stubborn then." "This is not stubbornness. This is suicide." She paused at the corridor entrance, looking back at the assembled instructors. These warriors from a dozen species who'd evolved to be apex predators, who could tear through steel and survive plasma fire, who were being defeated by physics and environmental hazards. "How long do those cubs have?" Nora asked. 15 minutes, maybe less. "Then I need to move fast." She started stripping off her outer uniform layers down to the basic underlayer. "Someone time me. I want to know if I break any speed records." "You can't be serious," Quen rumbled. "Vacuum exposure causes explosive decompression. The radiation alone will probably give me cancer in about 20 rotations. Yeah, I'll worry about that later." Nora sealed the underlayer, checked the emergency oxygen mask she'd grabbed from a supply locker. It would give her maybe 3 minutes of air. Maybe? Volineth stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Your personnel file was incomplete. I researched further. After your assignment, you're from Earth's northern territories, post-catastrophe settlement zones. Guilty. Your population adapted to extreme environmental conditions through genetic modification and environmental pressure. But even enhanced human physiology cannot. Can't survive hard vacuum indefinitely. I know, but I can survive it longer than anyone else here." She met his compound gaze steadily. "Those are children, Commander. I'm not debating this." She didn't wait for permission, just cycled through the airlock and stepped into hell. The maintenance corridor was exactly as bad as advertised. The moment the interior door sealed behind her, temperature plummeted. The hull breach was visible at the corridor's midpoint, a ragged tear where something had punched through the station's exterior, exposing the passage to space. Nora's skin started burning immediately. Not from heat, from cold so intense it felt like fire. The vacuum pulled at her, trying to drag air from her lungs. Her emergency mask helped, but the pressure differential was agonizing. She ran anyway. Later, the monitoring footage would show the medical staff exactly how impossible it should have been. Human tissue doesn't survive vacuum exposure. Blood doesn't stay liquid at zero pressure. Lungs don't function without atmosphere. Every biological rule said she should have died in the first 30 seconds. Nora made it to the wing 12 access in 90 seconds. Her fingers were already showing frostbite as she manually overrode the emergency lock. The skin on her face had started to blister from radiation exposure. Blood vessels in her eyes had burst, turning her vision red around the edges. But her hands were steady as she got the door open and stumbled into the pressurized section beyond. The cubs were huddled together for warmth, their young bodies already shivering violently. They looked up as the door opened, expecting rescue teams in full environmental gear. Instead, they got one half-frozen human who looked like she'd been through a war. "Hey, kids," Nora managed, her voice rough. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She made 6 trips total, carrying 3 cubs at a time back through that nightmare corridor, her body deteriorating further with each crossing. By the final run, she was operating on pure will and spite, humanity's 2 most reliable resources. When she emerged from the last trip, Ulk was waiting with a medical team. The multi-limbed physician took one look at Nora's condition and started barking orders in 3 languages simultaneously. Nora collapsed exactly once, right after confirming all 16 cubs were safe. Then her body decided it had done enough impossible things for one day and politely shut down. She woke up 2 days later in medical, bandaged extensively and connected to enough monitoring equipment to stock a small hospital. Volneth was there, along with Ulk and a crowd of her students who'd apparently been maintaining a constant vigil. "You died," Volneth said without preamble. "Twice. Cardiac arrest from the trauma. Ulk resuscitated you both times." "Dramatic," Nora croaked. "Your personnel file," the commander continued, "failed to mention that humans from post-catastrophe zones have been genetically adapted to survive extreme conditions. Didn't seem relevant for a teaching position. You walked through hard vacuum, multiple times, carrying children, while dying. Had to. No one else could." Kix pushed forward, his fur showing distressed colors. "Why would you risk termination for juveniles you barely know?" Nora looked at her students, these young predators from species that could kill her without effort, who'd been raised on strength and dominance and individual excellence. They were staring at her like she'd violated fundamental laws of reality. "Because," she said quietly, "someone once taught me that surviving isn't enough. You have to know what you're surviving for." Ven's voice was unusually gentle. "What are you surviving for? You, all of you, the galaxy's next generation." She managed a weak smile. "Humans don't have the best weapons or the strongest bodies. What we have is the refusal to quit, the ability to keep going when everything says we should stop. And that's what I'm teaching you, not just how to fight, but why to keep fighting when fighting seems impossible." The cubs moved closer, surrounding her medical bed in a protective circle that would have made their individual species' ancestors proud. In the observation area, Quen stood beside Volneth, watching the scene. "I was wrong about human weakness," Quen said. "We all were," the commander replied. "They're not weak. They're terrifying in ways we never anticipated. Because they refuse to quit? Because they refuse to quit, and they teach that refusal to everyone around them." Volneth's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The galaxy spent thousands of rotations assuming the most dangerous species would be the ones with the best natural weapons. We never considered that the most dangerous species might be the one that simply refuses to die, and make sure no one else does either. Below, Nora was already arguing with Ulk about when she could return to training. The cubs were laughing, actually laughing, at her stubbornness. And somewhere in the station's depths, the future was being written by a human who'd walked into training and taught apex predators that survival was scarier than strength, that endurance was more terrifying than ferocity, and that the most dangerous thing in the universe was someone who cared enough to refuse to quit. The cubs had leapt from the pack and run to her, and they weren't planning on leaving anytime soon.